Picture this. The year is 1683, and the city of Vienna stands utterly surrounded. For weeks, the massive Ottoman army has been camped outside its walls, a sea of tents and banners stretching as far as the eye can see. The thunder of cannons is constant, the air thick with smoke and tension. This is more than just a battle. It is a clash of empires, a moment that would decide the fate of Europe. We often remember the dramatic cavalry charges and the bravery of soldiers, but what we rarely see are the brilliant minds working behind the scenes, the true architects of this monumental event. Behind every great siege, there are master planners, engineers, and strategists whose contributions are often lost in the shadow of clashing armies. These are the individuals who designed the intricate trench networks, who drew the detailed maps guiding thousands of troops, and who orchestrated the complex mechanics of attack and defense. They are the unseen forces who turned ambition into reality, and their stories are every bit as compelling as the battles themselves. In this video, we are going to uncover these hidden figures, the engineers, the cartographers, the logisticians, and the visionary leaders who made the Siege of Vienna one of the most meticulously planned military operations of its time. So what does it really take to lay siege to a city? Who are the unsung heroes operating behind the curtain of history? Over the course of this exploration, we will dive into the tools they used, the tactics they perfected, and the innovations they pioneered. We will examine the mechanics of siege warfare, the art of map-making and intelligence, and the masterminds whose decisions shaped the outcome of this pivotal conflict. This is not just a story of conflict, it is a story of human ingenuity, of meticulous planning, and of the often overlooked brilliance that changes the course of history. Join us as we pull back the curtain and reveal the unseen architects of the Siege of Vienna. To understand the sheer magnitude of the events unfolding outside its walls, we must first grasp what Vienna truly represented. This was not merely another city on a map. It was the grand gateway between two worlds, the very linchpin holding Central Europe together. Imagine the continent as a vast, intricate door, and Vienna was its most crucial lock. If that lock were to break, the door would swing wide open, and the heart of Europe would be exposed. For the expanding Ottoman Empire, controlling Vienna was the ultimate strategic prize, the final step in a long campaign to dominate the continent. For the fragile alliance of European powers known as the Holy League, losing Vienna was simply unthinkable. It would have meant the collapse of their first and most vital line of defense. The city's immense strategic value was carved into the landscape itself by the Danube River. This powerful waterway acted as a natural highway, connecting the rich markets of the east with the burgeoning cities of the west. Vienna sat astride this aquatic crossroads, making it an unrivaled hub for moving not just goods and wealth, but entire armies. Control the Danube, and you control the flow of trade and military power across the region. Any force holding Vienna could effectively dictate terms to a vast portion of the continent, levying taxes on river traffic or halting the advance of enemy troops. This geographic reality made the city a constant target and a permanent prize in the centuries-long struggle between empires. Historians often emphasize that Vienna's value was both tangible and symbolic. On a practical level, its capture would have given the Ottoman Sultan Mehmed IV direct access to the soft underbelly of Europe, opening a clear path for further campaigns into Germany and beyond. The resources needed to sustain such a massive invasion could then flow uninterrupted down the Danube. But beyond the sheer mechanics of conquest, Vienna represented something far greater. For the Ottoman leadership, it was the fulfillment of a long-held ambition, a chance to eclipse the achievements of previous sultans and cement their legacy as the true masters of both East and West. For the Holy Roman Empire and its allies, Vienna was a bastion of Christendom, a symbol of resilience against what they perceived as an existential threat. Its defense was framed not just as a military campaign, but as a moral and religious crusade. This potent combination of strategic necessity and powerful symbolism amplified the stakes of the siege to an almost unimaginable degree. The commanders on both sides were not just fighting for territory, they were fighting for the future direction of history itself. Every decision made, every trench dug, and every map drawn was weighed down by this colossal pressure. The minds orchestrating this confrontation understood that the fate of millions hinged on the outcome at Vienna, transforming the siege from a simple military engagement into one of the most critical turning points the continent would ever witness. To comprehend the force that arrived outside Vienna's walls, one must envision not just an army, but a moving city, a self-sustaining organism of staggering complexity and scale. Contemporary chronicles from within the Ottoman camp describe a sea of tents so vast it seemed to alter the very landscape, housing a force that modern estimates suggest numbered well over 100,000 men. This was no mere horde, it was a meticulously organized instrument of conquest, a reflection of the Ottoman Empire's immense administrative power. The sheer diversity of this force was one of its greatest strengths, drawing soldiers and specialists from every corner of the empire, from the arid plains of Anatolia to the forested mountains of the Balkans. Each contingent brought its own unique skills to the field, creating a multifaceted military machine capable of adapting to nearly any challenge. At the heart of this formidable host were the legendary Janissaries, the elite infantry corps that formed the Sultan's personal guard and the backbone of the Ottoman army. Recruited through the Devshirme system from Christian families within the empire and raised as disciplined soldiers utterly loyal to the state, the Janissaries were among the most professional and feared troops in the world. They were masters of the musket and the grenade, experts in close-quarters combat, and were often the first to storm a breach in enemy walls. Alongside them rode the Sipahi, the armored cavalry of the feudal Timur system. These mounted warriors, granted land in exchange for military service, provided the army's mobile striking power, capable of scouting, raiding, and delivering devastating charges on the battlefield. Their presence ensured the Ottomans controlled the countryside around Vienna, isolating the city and cutting it off from potential aid. But the true genius of the Ottoman war machine lay in its specialized units, the unsung technical experts who turned a campaign of conquest into a precise science. The artillery corps, for instance, was a marvel of logistical planning. They transported massive bronze cannons, some firing stone balls weighing hundreds of pounds, across hundreds of miles of difficult terrain. This required a dedicated army of oxen, wagons, and engineers to build and repair roads and bridges. The chief gunner, a position of immense importance, was responsible for the placement, supply, and operation of these complex weapons, a task requiring deep mathematical and engineering knowledge. Equally crucial were the military engineers, the men who designed and dug the intricate networks of trenches and tunnels that snaked their way toward Vienna's formidable walls. These sap lines allowed troops to approach under cover, while mines were planted to blast apart the city's stone defenses. Sustaining such a colossal enterprise for months on end in enemy territory was perhaps the most impressive feat of all. This was made possible by an unparalleled logistical system that functioned as the empire's circulatory system, A constant stream of supply caravans protected by military escorts flowed from the Ottoman heartlands. They brought vast quantities of grain, dried meat, and hardtack to feed the army, along with fodder for the tens of thousands of horses, camels, and oxen. Blacksmiths and armorers maintained a mobile industry to repair weapons and equipment, while medical units staffed by physicians set up field hospitals. Communication was maintained through a relay system of couriers on fast horses, carrying orders from Grand Vizier Kara Mustafa Pasha in the Central Command, sent to his subordinate commanders across the entire operation. This intricate hierarchy, with its clear chains of command and specialized roles, allowed for a level of coordination that few contemporary European armies could match. It was this seamless fusion of brute force and sophisticated organization that made the Ottoman war machine such a terrifying and effective force. At the very center of this sprawling, intricate machine stood one man, the architect who willed it into motion and directed its every action, Grand Vizier Kara Mustafa Pasha. To understand the siege is to understand this complex and ambitious figure, a man whose personal destiny became inextricably linked with the fate of empires. He was not born into the highest echelons of power. His story is one of calculated ascent through the treacherous ranks of the Ottoman court. Originally from Albania or perhaps Anatolia, he was brought into the imperial system through the Devshirme levy, a testament to the empire's unique ability to identify and cultivate talent from across its diverse territories. He rose under the wing of the influential Kerpulu family, marrying into their dynasty and learning the arts of statecraft and war from his predecessor and brother-in-law, the formidable Grand Vizier Ahmed Kerpulu. This mentorship was crucial, shaping Kara Mustafa into a capable administrator and a shrewd political operator, preparing him for the immense responsibility he would one day inherit. His relationship with Sultan Mehmed IV was a delicate dance of power and protocol. The Sultan, often referred to as Mehmed the Hunter for his passion for the sport, was content to leave the arduous business of governance and military command to his capable Grand Vizier. This dynamic granted Kara Mustafa unprecedented autonomy, effectively making him the sole director of Ottoman foreign and military policy. He was the one poring over maps in his command tent, while the Sultan remained distant in his palace. Yet this authority was a double-edged sword. Ultimate success would bring glory to the Sultanate, but any failure would rest squarely and devastatingly on the Vizier's own shoulders. He operated under the constant, unspoken pressure of this arrangement, knowing that the favor of the court was as fickle as the wind. So what drove this man to set his sights on Vienna, the most heavily fortified prize in Christendom? His motivations were a potent cocktail of the personal, the political, and the pious. For personal glory, capturing Vienna would elevate his name above all previous Grand Viziers, securing his legacy for centuries to come. He envisioned himself as the conqueror who finally achieved what Suleiman the Magnificent had failed to do a century and a half earlier. Geopolitical expansion was an equally powerful driver. Controlling Vienna would not only open the Danube waterway for further campaigns into the heart of Europe, but would also cripple the Habsburgs, the Ottoman Empire's most persistent and powerful European rival. And we cannot discount the element of religious fervor. As a leader of a vast Islamic empire, he framed the campaign as a holy war, a Gaza, against the Christian powers of Europe. This religious justification helped unite his diverse army and secure support from devout factions within the empire. Accounts from his contemporaries paint a picture of a leader with a commanding presence, one who valued opulence and ceremony as tools of authority. He led from the front, establishing his lavish command tent within sight of Vienna's walls, a bold statement of his confidence and intent. His leadership style was intensely hands-on, he was deeply involved in the minutiae of the siege, from approving engineering plans to reviewing intelligence reports. He was a brilliant organizer, as evidenced by the incredible logistical feat of assembling and sustaining his massive army so far from home. However, this strength was paired with a critical weakness, an arrogance that bordered on hubris. Convinced of his army's invincibility and the inevitability of Vienna's fall, he made the fateful decision to reject a full-scale assault early in the siege, opting instead for a methodical, grinding approach of bombardment and mining. This decision was rooted in a desire to preserve the city's infrastructure for his own use and to minimize Ottoman casualties, but it ultimately proved to be a catastrophic miscalculation. It gave the defenders precious time to repair breaches, and most importantly, it allowed a massive relief army, which he consistently underestimated, the crucial window it needed to march to Vienna's rescue. This single error in judgment, this failure to appreciate the resolve and speed of his enemies, would ultimately seal his fate and unravel his grand design, demonstrating how the human elements of pride and overconfidence can topple even the most meticulously laid plans. While the Grand Vizier provided the strategic vision, it was the military engineers who translated that ambition into the stark reality on the ground. These men were the true artists of siegecraft, the unsung technicians whose work literally reshaped the earth around Vienna. Their profession was a unique blend of science and brutal practicality, and their expertise was drawn from a surprisingly international pool. Alongside Ottoman specialists educated in the empire's own sophisticated military schools were a significant number of European renegades Christian engineers who, for reasons of personal gain, religious conversion, or simply the pursuit of their craft, offered their services to the Sultan. These individuals were often trained in the latest Italian and German methods of fortification and attack, making them invaluable assets. They brought with them the cutting-edge principles of Renaissance military science, which viewed warfare as a mathematical problem to be solved with geometry, physics, and calculated precision. This fusion of Eastern and Western knowledge created a corps of engineers that was arguably the most advanced of its time. Their primary task was to solve the most dangerous problem in a siege: how to move men and machines across open ground under the lethal fire of the defenders. Their answer was the sap trench. Imagine a deep, narrow ditch zigzagging its way relentlessly toward the city walls. This was not a straight line. Its angled design was intentional, meant to deflect cannonballs and prevent enfilading fire from sweeping down its entire length. Teams of laborers, often protected by wooden mantlets or wicker gabions, would dig these trenches under the constant supervision of the engineers. The work was agonizingly slow and incredibly perilous, conducted within arrow and musket range. As the sap drew nearer to the walls, the engineers would direct the construction of massive earthen batteries. These were raised platforms, carefully engineered to support the weight and recoil of the heaviest cannons, bringing them to an elevation that allowed them to fire directly at the top of Vienna's ramparts or pound a single section of wall repeatedly to create a breach. Perhaps the most feared tool in their arsenal was the mine. This was subterranean warfare, a dark and claustrophobic battle fought deep beneath the surface. Ottoman sappers, many of them experienced miners from the Balkans, would dig tunnels from the safety of their own lines toward the foundations of Vienna's bastions. Working by the dim light of oil lamps, they hollowed out chambers at the end of these tunnels, which they then packed with enormous barrels of black powder. The ignition of these mines was intended to literally blow entire sections of the city's defenses sky high, creating instant breaches for assault troops to storm. In response, the Viennese defenders employed their own counterminers, listening for the faint sounds of digging, and then digging their own tunnels to intercept and destroy the Ottoman efforts, leading to horrific underground battles in pitch-black confines. Beyond these earthworks, the Ottoman engineers demonstrated remarkable ingenuity with prefabricated and portable technology. To cross the many small streams and ditches around Vienna, they employed lightweight, portable bridges that could be assembled quickly under fire, allowing for the rapid movement of troops and artillery. There are even accounts of prefabricated wooden towers and sections of palisade, manufactured behind the lines and then brought forward to quickly secure newly captured ground. These innovations speak to a highly organized and forward-thinking logistical mind, treating a siege almost like a large-scale construction project. The blueprint for Vienna's encirclement was not just on paper. It was etched into the very landscape by these masters of earth and gunpowder, whose technical brilliance created the conditions that brought a mighty city to the very brink of collapse. But a perfect plan is useless without perfect information. For all the might of the Ottoman army and the ingenuity of its engineers, their success hinged on an invisible, intricate web of knowledge, a deep understanding of the land, the enemy's fortifications, and the movements of their forces. This was the realm of cartographers and spies, the unseen architects who drew the target for the entire war machine to aim at. The maps used by Kara Mustafa and his commanders were not simple sketches. They were sophisticated instruments of war, the product of painstaking intelligence gathering that blended art, science, and subterfuge in equal measure. The Ottomans did not arrive at Vienna blind. For years, even decades, they had been compiling knowledge about this prized objective. Their maps were living documents, updated from a variety of shadowy sources. Some were based on older, captured charts, perhaps taken from a Habsburg officer or trader. Others were drawn from the detailed reports of merchants and diplomats who had traveled through the region, their keen eyes noting the width of rivers, the quality of roads, and the layout of town defenses under the guise of peaceful commerce. Perhaps the most valuable sources were local informants, disgruntled nobles, ambitious traders, or individuals simply swayed by Ottoman gold who provided intimate details about the city's weak points, the locations of granaries, and the morale of its citizens. This mosaic of information was then handed over to the empire's own skilled surveyors, men who could translate verbal descriptions and rough notes into precise, actionable military cartography. This blend of intelligence sources created a remarkably accurate picture of the challenge ahead. The resulting maps would have detailed the gentle slopes leading up to the city walls, the course of the Wien River, and the dense woods on the surrounding hills like the Kollenberg. This geographical intelligence was absolutely critical for the placement of the massive artillery batteries. Commanders needed to know the exact distance to the walls to calibrate their cannons, and the elevation of the ground to ensure their shot would strike at the right height. The intricate network of sap trenches that snaked toward the city, their winding paths were not random. They were carefully plotted on these maps to maximize cover from defending cannons, using the natural contours of the land that the surveyors had so meticulously recorded. The human element of this intelligence war was just as dramatic as the physical siege. Ottoman akinses, the lightning-fast light cavalry scouts, were the eyes of the army, constantly probing far beyond the camp to track any movement of relief forces. But more daring still were the secret agents who operated inside enemy territory. These individuals, whose names are lost to history, would have blended into the population, gathering rumors in taverns or observing the comings and goings of soldiers on the ramparts. There are even accounts of diplomats involved in pre-siege negotiations, using their privileged access to covertly assess the city's defenses and the state of its garrison. The intelligence they smuggled back to the Ottoman command tent, perhaps hidden in a merchant's cart or carried by a swift courier under cover of darkness, could confirm a map's accuracy, reveal a newly repaired weak spot in a wall, or, most crucially, provide an early warning that a Christian relief army was on the march. In the high-stakes game of medieval warfare, a single piece of timely information from a shadowy figure in the night could be more valuable than an entire regiment of janissaries. The true voice of the Ottoman siege was not the clash of steel or the cries of men, but the deafening, earth-shattering roar of its artillery. This was a symphony of destruction orchestrated by a diverse orchestra of guns, each with a specific and terrifying role. The stars of this brutal performance were the massive bombards, colossal bronze monsters like the legendary Great Basilisk. These were the siege breakers, capable of hurling stone cannonballs weighing well over 600 pounds. Their sole purpose was to methodically pound a single section of Vienna's venerable walls into rubble, creating the breaches through which the assault troops would eventually pour. But they were not alone. Supporting them were smaller, more mobile field guns and mortars. The mortars, with their high, arcing fire, were designed to lob explosive shells over the walls and into the city itself, targeting infrastructure, starting fires, and sowing terror among the civilian population cowering within. Getting these behemoths to the gates of Vienna was a Herculean logistical feat in itself, a testament to Ottoman engineering that was almost as impressive as their use in battle. Transporting a single great cannon required a dedicated team of hundreds of oxen, straining in tandem against heavy wooden wagons specially reinforced to bear the incredible weight. The journey from the foundries of Constantinople, across the Balkan mountains and through muddy river valleys, was a slow, grueling nightmare. Teams of engineers and road builders had to march ahead of the main army, strengthening bridges, leveling paths, and sometimes diverting entire streams just to create a passable route for this rolling artillery park. The sheer investment in time, animals, and manpower to deliver these guns to the battlefield underscored their absolute criticality to Kara Mustafa's entire strategy. Without them, a direct assault on Vienna's modern bastions would have been sheer suicide. Once in place, the bombardment began a relentless day and night assault on the senses and the city's defenses. The firing process was a complex, dangerous ballet. Teams of gunners would first swab the hot barrel clean, then load in a carefully measured silk bag of gunpowder, followed by the heavy stone ball, which required a team of men to lift with ropes. The chief gunner, using simple aiming markers and a wealth of experience, would calculate the elevation and direction. The ignition itself was a moment of controlled violence, a flash and a thunderous boom that could be felt in the chests of men hundreds of yards away. The ammunition varied by target. Solid stone shot was for battering walls, while iron cannonballs were sometimes used for their greater range and impact on harder surfaces. For psychological effect, the Ottomans fired incendiary shells, hollow iron spheres filled with gunpowder and combustible material, fitted with a slow-burning fuse designed to explode in the air or after impact, raining fire and shrapnel down on the city. The psychological impact of this constant barrage was perhaps as devastating as the physical damage. Diaries from Viennese defenders describe a world of unending noise and vibration, where sleep was impossible and the very air seemed to tremble. The random nature of the mortar fire meant that death could descend from a clear blue sky at any moment, eroding morale and creating a pervasive atmosphere of dread. The nights were lit by the glow of fires started by hot shot and the red traces of cannon fire, turning the city into a waking nightmare. Yet, amidst this chaos, the defenders displayed remarkable resilience. Teams of citizens and soldiers, often led by women, worked tirelessly to douse fires and repair the worst of the damage each night, using timber and baskets of earth to plug gaps in the walls almost as quickly as the Ottoman guns could create them. This desperate race between destruction and repair became the central rhythm of the siege, a testament to human endurance in the face of overwhelming firepower. While the Ottoman engineers were masters of the offensive art of digging and demolition, their counterparts inside Vienna were proving to be brilliant, desperate innovators in the science of defense. The city they were tasked with protecting was not just any medieval fortress, it was a modern marvel of military architecture, a prime example of the Tres Italien or Star Fort design. This was a radical departure from the tall, thin walls of old castles. Instead, Vienna's defenses were a series of low, thick, arrow-shaped bastions made of earth faced with brick, jutting out from the main curtain wall. The genius of this design was its geometry. Each bastion was positioned so that its sides could provide flanking fire, meaning defenders manning the walls of one bastion could fire their cannons and muskets directly along the face of the neighboring bastion, creating a deadly, interlocking crossfire that would sweep any attacker attempting to scale the walls into a slaughter zone. There were no blind spots. Every inch of approach was covered by multiple angles of fire, turning the open ground outside the city into a meticulously designed killing field. This formidable system, however, was being tested beyond its limits by the relentless Ottoman bombardment. This forced the city's commander, the resolute and experienced Ernst Rudiger von Starhemberg, and his engineers to become masters of improvisation. As the great Ottoman guns methodically pulverized sections of the brick facing, the resilient earthen core of the bastions often absorbed the impact, but breaches still appeared. Every night, under the cover of darkness, a frantic race against time began. Teams of soldiers were organized, but they were joined by hundreds of ordinary citizens, men, women, and even older children, all directed by the garrison's engineers. They would swarm the damaged sections, filling thousands of sacks with earth and rubble to create makeshift barricades, plugging the gaps with whatever was available: timber from demolished houses, overturned carts, and even bulky furniture. These improvised repairs, known as retrenchments, were essentially new inner walls built behind the breaches, ensuring that even if the outer wall fell, the defenders would have a second, and sometimes a third, line of defense from which to fight. The battle was not only fought above ground but also deep beneath it, in a claustrophobic and terrifying war of sound and darkness. The Austrian defenders, aware of the Ottoman expertise in mining, employed their own counter-sappers. These men, often miners from Tyrol or Styria, would spend hours in absolute silence in the city's cellars and countermine galleries, listening with ear pressed to the ground or to a drumhead stretched over a water barrel which vibrated like a diaphragm. The moment they detected the faint, scraping sounds of Ottoman picks and shovels, they would spring into action, digging their own tunnel directly toward the noise. The goal was to intercept the enemy's sap before it reached the foundations. When they broke through, the resulting underground fight was brutal and primitive, a short, violent struggle in pitch-black confines with picks, shovels, axes, and pistols. Sometimes they would simply break into the enemy tunnel, stuff the chamber with brushwood and gunpowder, and ignite it, collapsing the entire passage on the Ottoman sappers inside. This grim, hidden war of attrition was crucial. Every mine detected and neutralized was a potential catastrophe averted. The soul of Vienna's defense, however, was this incredible communal spirit. With a garrison depleted by battle and disease, the line between soldier and civilian completely blurred. Guildsmen, carpenters, blacksmiths, and masons lent their skills to repair walls and fabricate weapons. Brewers and bakers organized the distribution of dwindling food supplies. Women played an especially vital and celebrated role, not just nursing the wounded but actively manning the defenses. They formed fire brigade chains to pass buckets of water to put out blazes. They cooked great cauldrons of hot soup to sustain the workers on the walls, and there are numerous accounts of them throwing stones and makeshift incendiary devices down on Ottoman attackers during assaults. This was not a defense conducted by a professional army alone. It was a defense waged by an entire city, united by a shared determination to survive. This collective resilience, channeled through the clever adaptations of their engineers, bought Vienna the one thing it needed most: precious time. Yet for all the heroism unfolding within the beleaguered city, the fate of Vienna would ultimately be decided not by its defenders, but by a force gathering on the horizon. As the Ottoman siege tightened its grip, a fragile alliance of European powers was finally stirring into action, a coalition that history would remember as the Holy League. And at its head was a figure of immense reputation and ambition, King John III Sobiski of Poland. This was not a man who shied from a fight. His entire reign had been defined by his martial prowess. For years, he had earned the title Savior of Vienna in advance, having already halted Ottoman expansion into Poland at the pivotal Battle of Kotin. He was a warrior king in the truest sense, a monarch who led from the front, and his presence on the battlefield instantly transformed the morale and potential of the entire relief effort. The journey to unite this diverse force was a diplomatic and logistical maze of staggering complexity. The alliance between the Holy Roman Emperor Leopold I and Sobiski was one of necessity, not warm friendship. There was deep-seated mistrust between the Poles and the Austrians. Leopold had initially hesitated to call for help, wary of owing a great debt to the powerful Polish king, and had even briefly evacuated Vienna himself, a move viewed by many as cowardice. It took the desperate pleading of Pope Innocent XI, who saw the siege as an existential battle for Christendom, to truly solidify the pact. The logistical challenge of moving an army was equally daunting. Sobiski's force, the core of the relief army, had to march over 300 kilometers from Krakow to Vienna in the height of summer. This required meticulous planning, securing routes through friendly territory, establishing pre-arranged supply depots with food and fresh horses, and maintaining a punishing pace that would see his winged hussars cover an average of 30 kilometers a day. This was a race against the calendar as much as against the Ottomans, and every day of marching meant Vienna was one day closer to falling. What arrived on the hills overlooking Vienna and the Ottoman camp was not a single, homogeneous army, but a tapestry of different cultures, languages, and military traditions, all needing to be woven into a cohesive fighting force. The coalition was a truly international effort. Alongside Sobiski's Poles featuring his elite heavy cavalry, the famed winged hussars were the disciplined imperial troops of Charles V, Duke of Lorraine, a skilled commander who had been harrying the Ottoman flanks for weeks. There were contingents from various German states like Saxony and Bavaria, each with their own commanders and their own proud military doctrines. The critical task of unifying this diverse group under a single command fell to Sobiski, who was elected overall commander by the Allied leaders. His first masterstroke was a gesture of both practicality and symbolic unity. He immediately integrated the various units, placing German infantry alongside Polish cavalry in the battle lines, ensuring that no single national contingent would be isolated or bear the brunt of the fighting alone. He fostered a shared sense of purpose, framing the coming battle not as a Polish or Austrian victory, but as a triumph for all of Europe. We are granted a remarkable window into the mind of this master strategist through his own words. Throughout the campaign, Sobiski maintained a detailed correspondence with his beloved wife, Queen Marie Casimir. These letters are far from simple romantic missives. They are vivid, Chinese letter, Chinese letter, Chinese letter, Chinese letter, Chinese letter, Chinese letter, filled with sharp observations, tactical assessments, and revealing flashes of his commanding personality. In one, he coolly dismisses the Ottoman fortifications, writing that their palisades are not as strong as they appear. In another, he reveals his audacious plan, confiding his intention to descend upon the enemy like an avalanche from the mountains. His writing shows a leader brimming with confidence, yet meticulously attentive to detail, from the condition of his soldiers' boots to the alignment of his artillery. He was a general who thought in sweeping, grand maneuvers, but never lost sight of the human and material elements that made those maneuvers possible. All of this planning culminated in one of the most famous and decisive battle plans in military history. On the morning of September the 12th, 1683, Sobiski stood on the summit of the Kollenberg Hill. The entire Ottoman encampment and the besieged city spread out beneath him like a living map. His strategy was a masterpiece of coordinated, multi-phase warfare. The battle began not with a cavalry charge, but with a relentless infantry engagement. The German and Austrian forces deployed on the left and center were ordered to advance down the steep slopes and engage the main body of the Ottoman army, fixing them in place. For hours, a fierce and bloody stalemate ensued in the vineyards and villages below. Sobiski watched and waited with the immense mass of his Polish cavalry held in reserve on the right wing, allowing the sun to dip lower in the sky and the Ottoman troops to become increasingly exhausted and committed to the fight in the valley. Then, as the afternoon wore on, he gave the order. The ground itself began to tremble as over 20,000 horsemen, with the winged hussars at their spearhead, began their descent. They did not charge headlong down the steepest slope. Instead, they executed a disciplined, sweeping maneuver along a gentler gradient, maintaining their formation until they emerged onto the flatter ground of the Wienerwald. There, they formed into the largest cavalry charge in history and smashed into the Ottoman flank and rear. The impact was not merely physical, it was psychological, an overwhelming shock that shattered Ottoman morale completely. The mastermind of the relief had not just brought an army to Vienna, he had brought a perfectly timed and executed plan that turned the tide of history in a single, breathtaking moment. While the thunder of cannons and the flash of steel defined the front lines, the true lifeblood of the entire campaign flowed through a vast, intricate, and often invisible network of communication and supply. For both the sprawling Ottoman army and the trapped defenders within Vienna, this logistical framework was the nervous system that kept the body of their war effort alive and functioning. The ability to move information faster than the enemy and to feed tens of thousands of men and animals month after month was a battle fought in the background, one whose outcome was just as decisive as any cavalry charge. For Grand Vizier Kara Mustafa Pasha, ruling over his tent city outside Vienna, maintaining a link to his sovereign in Constantinople, was a matter of political survival as much as military necessity. The Ottomans mastered this art of long-distance communication through a multi-layered system. The backbone was a relay of imperial couriers known as ulak, who rode swift horses along the carefully maintained roads of the empire. These riders could cover astonishing distances, changing horses at dedicated stations called Menzelhain, located a day's ride apart. A message from the front lines could theoretically reach the Sultan's court in under 2 weeks, an incredible feat for the era. For more immediate tactical signaling across the vast encampment, they employed a sophisticated system of flags during the day and signal fires or lamps at night. Watchtowers on high ground could relay simple pre-arranged messages over shorter distances, creating a semaphore-like chain that allowed Kara Mustafa to coordinate movements between his distant corps commanders blockading the city without the delay of a mounted messenger. Inside the besieged city, the challenge of communication was one of life and death. With the Ottoman noose drawn tight, getting a message out to the desperately hoped-for relief army required incredible courage and cunning. The most common method was to use trusted individuals who knew the local terrain intimately, hunters, woodsmen, or brave volunteers from the garrison. They would slip out of the city under the cover of darkness or thick fog, often through the sewers or along the bed of the partially drained Wien River, moving like shadows through the Ottoman picket lines. These messengers carried letters, sometimes written in code or invisible ink, sewn into their clothing or hidden in a hollowed-out staff. The risks were immense. Capture meant almost certain execution. There are accounts of messages being attached to small dogs or even shot out of the city by archers with specially weighted arrows, though the success of these more inventive methods was likely limited. Every successful run was a minor miracle, a fragile thread of hope connecting the besieged to the outside world. The most Herculean task for both sides, however, was not moving information but moving food. The Ottoman logistics machine was a wonder of pre-modern organization. To feed its colossal army, the empire activated a supply chain that stretched back to its bread baskets in Bulgaria, Thrace, and Anatolia. Vast convoys of ox-drawn carts, sometimes numbering in the thousands, creaked their way along the military roads, carrying immense quantities of grain, barley, and dried biscuit. These were protected by military escorts against Christian cavalry raids and local bandits. Behind the lines in the camp itself, mobile mills ground the grain into flour, and massive field ovens baked bread daily for the troops. The challenge of feeding the armies tens of thousands of horses, camels, and oxen was even greater, requiring constant foraging parties to strip the surrounding countryside of grass and hay. As the siege dragged on and the local resources were exhausted, the distance these foragers had to travel grew longer, stretching the army's reach and making the supply columns from Constantinople all the more vital. Within Vienna's walls, the situation grew increasingly dire. The city had stockpiled food, but not for a siege of such length and with so many refugees crammed inside. Under the stern direction of Commander Starhemberg, strict rationing was imposed almost immediately. The daily bread allowance shrank week by week, and authorities were forced to seize private stocks from warehouses and wealthy homes to distribute among the population. The city's butchers were ordered to slaughter all available livestock, not just for meat but also to conserve dwindling fodder. As supplies ran critically low, innovation born of desperation took over. People began eating horses, cats, and dogs. There are even accounts of leather being boiled and softened to make a wretched, barely edible soup. Every able-bodied person was put to work, and the efficient management of these pitifully scarce resources became a defensive weapon in itself. The communal spirit that fortified the walls also extended to the soup kitchens, where the little food available was shared as equally as possible, a grim testament to the organization required to stave off collapse until help could arrive. This relentless focus on sustenance from the sprawling Ottoman supply chains to the measured spoonfuls of gruel in a Viennese cellar underscored a fundamental truth of warfare, that no army, no matter how brave, can fight on an empty stomach. War, for all its destruction, has a paradoxical way of breaking down barriers and forcing the most unlikely of exchanges. The Siege of Vienna, a brutal clash of empires and faiths, was also a massive, if unwilling, summit of knowledge. Behind the cannon's smoke and the ringing of steel, a silent transfer of technology and ideas was taking place, a cultural osmosis that would leave both East and West forever changed. The very engineers and soldiers trying to kill one another were, in effect, the most attentive students of each other's craft, taking furious mental notes on what worked and what did not. The flow of military innovation was anything but one-directional. European observers, particularly the Austrians who bore the brunt of the assault, were deeply impressed by the Ottomans' mastery of siege trench warfare. The intricate, zigzagging sap lines that protected the attackers as they inched toward the walls represented a systematic approach to offensive engineering that was far more advanced than the simple, direct trenches often used in European conflicts at the time. After the siege, this Ottoman method of approach was studied, codified, and enthusiastically adopted into the military manuals of European powers, becoming a standard tactic for centuries to come. Conversely, the defenders inside Vienna were showcasing the very latest in European defensive architecture. The trace Italian bastion system, with its geometric perfection and interlocking fields of fire, was a brutal education for the Ottoman assault troops. While they were familiar with the concept, facing it at its most effective in Vienna provided a masterclass in its strengths and potential weaknesses, lessons that would be taken back to Constantinople to inform their own future fortification designs. This exchange was made possible by a fascinating cast of characters who operated in the gray areas between cultures. Multilingual interpreters were not just linguistic conduits, they were cultural translators, essential for negotiations, interrogating prisoners, and understanding captured documents. Their nuanced understanding of both Ottoman and European customs made them invaluable assets to commanders on both sides. Then there were the renegade engineers, European Christians who, for various reasons, had offered their services to the Sultan. These men carried the latest secrets of Italian and German military science directly into the Ottoman command tent. They advised on artillery placement, oversaw mining operations, and provided insights into how European commanders were likely to think and react. Their defection was a tremendous loss for Christendom and a monumental gain for the Ottomans, a stark reminder that expertise knows no nationality, only opportunity. The sharing of knowledge extended far beyond the battlefield. In the grim field hospitals behind the lines, a more humane exchange took place. Ottoman medical practices, which had incorporated advanced knowledge from across the Islamic world and beyond, were in some areas superior to those of Europe. Their surgeons were often more experienced with traumatic injuries and gunshot wounds, and their use of anesthetics and antiseptic techniques, while primitive by modern standards, could be more effective. There are accounts of captured European doctors learning from their Ottoman captors, and vice versa, as they worked side by side to save lives, their professional curiosity momentarily overriding the conflict around them. Similarly, in the realms of cartography and logistics, the two sides were constantly learning from one another. The detailed maps used by the Ottomans, compiled from a variety of intelligence sources, were sometimes more accurate than those possessed by the defenders. The sheer scale and efficiency of the Ottoman supply chain, a logistical network that stretched across continents, was a breathtaking demonstration of administrative power that European quartermasters would spend decades trying to emulate. This unintended dialogue, forced by the circumstances of war, accelerated the pace of innovation in countless fields, proving that even in our darkest conflicts, we cannot help but learn from one another. The arsenal arrayed against Vienna's walls was a chilling exhibition of military engineering, a collection of tools designed for the singular purpose of breaking a city's will. While the massive cannons delivered the heaviest blows, they were supported by a host of specialized devices, each with a unique and terrible role to play in the grand design of the siege. This was not a chaotic assault, it was a systematic application of force, with every tool from the most primitive to the remarkably advanced being deployed in a deadly symphony of destruction. Among the most iconic of these weapons were the great battering rams. These were not the simple logs carried by men in ancient times. By the late 17th century, they had evolved into sophisticated machines. The typical Ottoman ram was a massive timber beam, often tipped with a cast iron head shaped like a ram's skull. It was suspended by chains within a long, wheeled wooden shed, its sides and roof armored with raw ox hides soaked in water or vinegar to protect against incendiary arrows and heated sand dropped from the walls above. Inside this mobile shelter, called a tortoise or cat, teams of men would rhythmically swing the beam back and forth, its iron head pounding with a dreadful, monotonous rhythm against a city gate or a weakened section of wall. The psychological effect of this relentless thudding, combined with the cannonade, was immense, a constant auditory reminder that the enemy was literally at the gate, patiently working to break its way in. Alongside these brute force instruments, the Ottomans also employed more nuanced projectile engines. While gunpowder had largely rendered massive torsion weapons like trebuchets obsolete for breaching walls, smaller versions were still in use for a different purpose: psychological warfare and area denial. These machines could lob more than just stones. Accounts from the siege describe the Ottomans launching decaying animal carcasses and even the bodies of plague victims over the walls in an early, horrifying form of biological warfare. The goal was to spread disease and fear among a population already stressed by shortages and confinement, to break their spirit even if their walls still stood. This grim tactic highlights the multifaceted nature of a siege, where victory could be achieved not just through structural collapse, but through the erosion of hope itself. For the men tasked with approaching the walls, survival depended on a category of tools designed for protection. The most common of these was the mantelet, a large, portable shield made of thick wooden planks, often reinforced with metal. These were carried by individual soldiers or propped up in lines to create a moving wall that allowed archers, musketeers, and the work crews digging approach trenches to operate under a hail of defensive fire from the ramparts. For larger working parties, the Ottomans used even more substantial mobile shelters called sows or penthouses. These were framed structures on wheels, covered in the same fire-resistant hides as the battering rams, under which teams of laborers could safely dig the vital sap trenches closer to the walls, shielded from direct observation and direct fire. The true masterpiece of Ottoman siegecraft, however, was happening invisibly deep beneath the feet of the defenders. The mining operations represented the pinnacle of their technical skill. The tools here were those of the miner and the sapper: strong picks and shovels for digging through earth and clay, wooden shoring to prevent tunnel collapses, and silent bellows for ventilating the long, cramped passages. But the most crucial tool was the listening device. Ottoman miners would use a simple yet effective method to detect counter-mining activity. They would suspend a drumhead or place the flat of a blade against the tunnel wall and press an ear to it, listening for the faint, telltale scrape and tap of enemy picks drawing near. This underground war was a battle of patience and acute hearing, fought in stifling darkness where a misjudged sound could mean being buried alive or meeting an enemy in a brutal, close-quarter fight with pickaxes in a space no wider than a man's shoulders. The construction and operation of these devices showcase a fascinating blend of tradition and innovation. The battering ram was an ancient concept, but its refinement into a well-protected, mobile system showed continuous adaptation. The use of trebuchets for throwing diseased matter was a macabre evolution of a traditional weapon's role. The tools of mining were as old as civilization itself, but their application in the precise, calculated context of a 17th-century siege, coordinated with above-ground artillery barrages, was a testament to the Ottomans' sophisticated, integrated approach to warfare. These were not random acts of violence but the calculated steps of a meticulous plan, each tool a specific answer to a specific problem posed by Vienna's formidable defenses. The effectiveness of each device was meticulously recorded in the diaries of those who faced them. One Viennese defender wrote with dread of the unceasing sound of digging that seemed to come from everywhere at once, while another described the terrifying sight of the great wheeled sheds creeping inexorably forward like some monstrous insect, each turn of their wheels bringing the city's doom. 1 yard closer, behind the grand strategies and the thunder of cannons were the true heartbeats of the siege, the countless ordinary individuals whose lives were irrevocably shaped by the machinery of war. For the civilian trapped within Vienna's walls and the soldier in the Ottoman camp, the reality was not one of glorious battle, but a grueling daily struggle for survival, marked by hunger, disease, and a slow erosion of hope. Their personal stories, often lost in the broad sweep of history, reveal the profound human cost of the conflict and the raw resilience that ultimately shaped its outcome. Inside the besieged city, life contracted into a desperate, grim routine centered on a single, all-consuming need: food. As the weeks dragged on, the careful rationing imposed by Commander Starhemberg became a cruel joke. The daily bread allowance, once a sustaining loaf, shrank to a thin, coarse slice made from a foul mixture of rye, pea flour, and eventually ground straw and dried animal bones. A diarist within the city wrote of seeing people fight over the carcass of a dead horse, while another described the heart-wrenching sound of children crying from hunger in the night. Disease was the siege's silent partner, thriving in the overcrowded cellars where most residents now lived to escape the constant bombardment. Typhus and dysentery spread rapidly, aided by contaminated water and the swarms of flies that rose from piles of unburied refuse and the latrines that could no longer be cleaned. The stench of gunpowder, smoke, and death became the city's permanent perfume, a sensory reminder of their deepening peril. Yet, in the face of this despair, astonishing acts of courage and communal spirit emerged to define Vienna's defense. The line between soldier and citizen completely vanished. Women, in particular, were the unsung heroes of the resistance. They organized themselves into firefighting brigades, passing buckets of water hand over hand to douse the blazes started by Ottoman incendiary shells. They cooked vast cauldrons of thin soup from whatever scraps could be found to feed the workers on the walls, and there are numerous accounts of them hurling stones, boiling water, and even quicklime down upon Ottoman attackers during assaults. One famous story tells of a baker's wife who, upon seeing an Ottoman flag planted on a breach, rushed forward and tore it down herself, a moment of defiant bravery that became legendary. This was not a defense conducted solely by professional soldiers. It was a defense waged by an entire community, their will to survive forged in the shared crucible of suffering. Across the lines in the vast Ottoman encampment, a different but equally challenging existence played out for the soldiers. This was a city of tents, a diverse microcosm of the empire itself, filled with men from Anatolia, the Balkans, North Africa, and the Middle East. While they were not starving, supply lines were stretching thin, and the diet for the average soldier, hardtack, dried mutton, and a grain porridge called bulgur, was monotonous and often insufficient. The initial high morale of a holy war began to sour as the siege stagnated. The constant, grinding fatigue of digging trenches and the nerve-shredding anticipation of assault wore men down. Disease was a great equalizer here, too. Camp fever swept through the crowded, unsanitary conditions, claiming as many lives as any combat. The diversity of the army, while a strength, also presented challenges. Communication between different units could be difficult, and tensions sometimes flared between the elite janissaries and the less prestigious irregular troops, known as azaps. The prolonged stay tested discipline. Letters recovered from the campaign reveal a deep undercurrent of homesickness and anxiety. one soldier wrote to his family, "We have been before this accursed city for many weeks. The ground is hard, the nights are cold, and the enemy does not yield. Pray for us." The leadership's decision to pursue a slow, methodical siege rather than a costly all-out assault began to breed resentment and frustration among the rank and file, who could not understand the Grand Vizier's caution. They saw their comrades dying from disease and snipers' bullets, and the glorious victory they were promised seemed to be slipping further away with each passing day. The decisions made in the command tensed Kara Mustafa's choice to encircle rather than immediately storm. Starhemberg's order to execute deserters to maintain discipline rippled outwards, directly impacting the daily reality of every individual involved. For the Viennese, their commander's ruthless resolve, though harsh, helped maintain a fragile order that was essential for collective survival. For the Ottomans, their commander's ambition and inflexibility meant enduring ever-worsening conditions with no end in sight. The outcome of the siege hinged not just on the brilliance of master plans, but on the fragile human spirit, on which side's resilience would break first under the immense, grinding pressure of prolonged conflict. The courage of a baker's wife and the despair of a homesick soldier were as pivotal to the story as the largest cannon or the most detailed map, setting the stage for the critical moments where that spirit would be pushed to its absolute limit. The Siege of Vienna did not conclude with a single, sudden collapse, but through a series of critical junctures where the entire course of history seemed to hang in the balance. Each of these moments was a direct result of the plans and personalities of the masterminds involved, and a single different choice could have rewritten the outcome entirely. The first and perhaps most fateful turning point was Grand Vizier Kara Mustafa Pasha's crucial delay in ordering a full-scale assault on the city. In the early days of the siege, the defending garrison was at its weakest, exhausted and disorganized. Many of his subordinate commanders and even some of his European renegade engineers urged an immediate, all-out attack to overwhelm the defenses before they could be shored up. Yet Kara Mustafa, confident in his methodical approach and perhaps dreaming of capturing a pristine city for his sultan, refused. He chose instead to rely on his artillery and mining operations to breach the walls completely, believing time was on his side. This decision was a catastrophic miscalculation rooted in his overconfidence and a fundamental underestimation of both the defenders' resilience and the speed with which a Christian relief army could unite and march. Those precious weeks of bombardment gave Commander Starhemberg and the citizens of Vienna the opportunity they desperately needed to repair breaches each night, and most importantly, it provided the lifeline for King John III Sobiski's coalition to arrive. Another pivotal moment occurred deep beneath the surface, in the claustrophobic darkness of the mining war. The Ottoman sappers had succeeded in digging several tunnels directly under Vienna's bastions, packing the chambers with enough black powder to potentially blast open massive gaps in the walls. The success of even one of these mines could have been decisive. However, the defensive innovation and sheer desperation of the Viennese counterminers thwarted these efforts time and again. In a critical engagement, they managed to detect the faint sounds of digging, intercept an Ottoman tunnel, and trigger a countermine that collapsed the passage and buried the sappers inside. This underground victory was not mere luck. It was the result of careful listening, rapid response, and incredible bravery. Had the Ottoman engineers been more successful, had just one of those massive mines exploded unimpeded, the resulting breach might have been too wide and too shocking for the weary defenders to plug, potentially flooding the city with janissaries long before the relief force crested the hills. The arrival of the Allied army on the Kollenberg Heights presented Kara Mustafa with his final and most difficult choice. He was now caught between the city he was besieging and a formidable new enemy army. His response revealed a critical flaw in his strategic thinking. Rather than consolidating his forces, ending the siege, and turning his entire army to face Sobiski in a prepared defensive position, he attempted to do both. He left a significant portion of his troops, including most of his elite janissaries, in the siege trenches to maintain pressure on Vienna, while sending other units, primarily his lighter cavalry, to harass and delay the Allies in the hills. This division of his force was a fatal error. It meant that neither wing of his army was strong enough to achieve victory. The troops in the trenches were now uselessly staring at walls while the battle was decided elsewhere, and the cavalry sent to delay the Allies were simply brushed aside by the disciplined advance of the Holy League's infantry. Kara Mustafa failed to recognize that the siege was over and a field battle had begun, a failure of adaptability that doomed his campaign. The climax of the entire campaign, Sobiski's legendary cavalry charge, was itself a masterclass in timing and decision-making that stands in stark contrast to the Ottoman command. The Polish king did not simply unleash his horsemen at the first sight of the enemy. He spent the entire morning and early afternoon of September the 12th observing the battle unfold below him. He watched as the Imperial infantry engaged the main Ottoman line, slowly wearing it down and fixing it in place. He waited patiently for the perfect moment, allowing the sun to move across the sky and the Ottoman troops to become increasingly tired and committed to the fight in the valley. Only when he was certain the enemy was fully engaged and his own squadrons were perfectly positioned on the flatter ground did he give the order. The descent of the winged hussars was not a reckless rush. It was a calculated, overwhelming application of force at the exact point and time where it would have the maximum physical and psychological impact. This impeccable timing, a direct result of Sobiski's experience and cool-headed leadership, shattered the Ottoman flank and turned a hard-fought battle into a rout within minutes. The grand plans of the unseen architects, so meticulously laid over months, ultimately unraveled in a single afternoon, decided by the quality of the decisions made in its most critical hours. The thunder of Sobiski's cavalry charge had faded, but its echo would reshape the continent for centuries to come. For Europe, the lifting of the siege was not merely a military victory. It was a psychological and political earthquake that fundamentally altered its trajectory. The immediate beneficiary was the House of Habsburg. Emperor Leopold I, who had initially fled the city, returned to a hero's welcome, his prestige immeasurably enhanced. The victory allowed the Habsburgs to shed their image as a beleaguered dynasty on the defensive and begin a new, aggressive phase of expansion known as the Great Turkish War. In the years that followed, a resurgent Habsburg army, buoyed by confidence and reinforced by the coalition that had saved Vienna, began to systematically push the Ottomans out of Hungary and eventually large parts of the Balkans. This eastward expansion would eventually transform Austria into a major European power, its influence cemented for the next 200 years. Beyond the political ascendancy of the Habsburgs, the victory fostered a powerful, though ultimately fleeting, sense of Christian unity. The successful coalition of Catholic powers, Austrians, Poles, and Germans, backed by the fervent support of the Pope, was celebrated as a triumph of a united Christendom over a perceived existential threat. This sentiment was immortalized in art, literature, and music, with John Sobiski hailed as the savior of Christendom. However, this unified front proved to be fragile. Old rivalries quickly resurfaced. Within a few years, the Habsburgs and the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth were themselves in conflict, and the dream of a lasting Christian alliance evaporated. Yet, the symbolic power of the victory remained. creating a new European identity built on the idea of successfully resisting Ottoman expansion, an idea that would fuel geopolitical strategies for generations. The economic ramifications were equally profound. With the Ottoman threat in Central Europe effectively neutralized, the trade routes along the Danube River became more secure, allowing goods and capital to flow more freely. The vast amounts of booty captured from the abandoned Ottoman camp, including gold, silks, and most famously, sacks of coffee beans, injected immediate wealth into the region. The latter commodity would famously spawn Vienna's first coffee houses, institutions that would become centers of intellectual and social life. Furthermore, the ransoming of thousands of Ottoman prisoners became a lucrative business for the victorious armies, providing a significant financial windfall that helped fund their continued campaigns south and east. For the Ottoman Empire, the defeat was nothing short of a catastrophe that triggered a period of intense internal scrutiny and dramatic change. The architect of the disaster, Grand Vizier Kara Mustafa Pasha, faced swift and brutal retribution. A messenger from Sultan Mehmed IV reached the retreating army at Belgrade in December of 1683, bearing the inevitable order. Kara Mustafa was ceremoniously strangled with a silk cord, the traditional method of execution for high-ranking officials who had failed the state. His head was sent back to Constantinople as proof of his demise, a stark warning about the price of failure and a desperate attempt by the Sultan to distance himself from the debacle. The humiliation before Vienna exposed critical weaknesses in the Ottoman military system. The empire, which had once been a pioneer in gunpowder technology and siege warfare, was now seen as having fallen behind its European rivals in tactical flexibility and grand strategy. In response, the Ottoman state began a period of earnest, if sometimes uneven, military reform. They studied the methods of their European adversaries, particularly their improved infantry tactics and artillery coordination. There was a conscious effort to modernize the army, though this was often met with resistance from traditionalist elements like the Janissaries, who saw innovation as a threat to their privileged status. The strategic focus of the empire also began to shift. The dream of expansion deep into Europe was abandoned. Subsequent campaigns were more defensive in nature, aimed at preserving the empire's existing borders rather than extending them. This strategic reorientation marked the beginning of a long, slow period of stagnation and gradual decline relative to the rising powers of Europe. Historians now largely view the siege as a critical watershed moment, the point at which the tide of Ottoman expansion into Europe crested and finally began to recede. While the empire remained a formidable power for another 2 centuries, it never again posed such a direct and immediate threat to the heart of the continent. The victory at Vienna did not just save a city, it redirected the flow of history, empowering the Habsburg ascendancy, halting Ottoman expansion, and setting the stage for the slow shift in the balance of power from east to west. The decisions made by the architects of the siege, both in its planning and in its aftermath, truly shaped the destiny of empires and defined the political landscape of Europe for eras to come. History may not repeat itself, but its lessons echo across the centuries, offering a timeless curriculum for anyone tasked with leading others through a challenge. The Siege of Vienna is far more than a dramatic story. It is a masterclass in strategy, its outcome a direct result of principles that remain startlingly relevant for leaders in boardrooms, governments, and our own personal lives today. The first and perhaps most glaring lesson is the absolute necessity of accurate, real-time intelligence. Kara Mustafa Pasha's campaign was initially a masterpiece of planning based on excellent information about geography and fortifications. Yet his critical failure was an intelligence gap regarding the enemy's will and capability. he underestimated the resilience of the Viennese defenders and, fatally, the speed and unity of the relief coalition. This flaw mirrors modern business failures where a company might have perfect market data, but completely misjudge a competitor's innovation cycle or a new startup's agility. As the ancient strategist Sun Tzu famously asserted, "If you know the enemy and know yourself, you need not fear the result of 100 battles." The Ottomans knew the walls of Vienna, but they failed to truly know the spirit of the people inside them or the determination of the Allies rushing to their aid. This leads directly to the second crucial principle, the fatal cost of inflexibility. Kara Mustafa's rigid adherence to his initial plan, the methodical siege despite changing circumstances and the advice of his subordinates, doomed his campaign. When the relief army appeared on the Kollenberg, he refused to abandon the siege works and consolidate his forces for a pitched battle, attempting instead to fight a war on two fronts. This lack of adaptability is a common trap in modern contexts. Consider a tech company that continues pouring resources into a failing product because it was the original vision, ignoring clear signals from the market and its own developers. The Prussian military theorist Karl von Clausewitz called this the friction of war, the concept that no plan survives first contact with the enemy. The true skill of a leader, he argued, lies not in perfect planning but in the ability to adapt plans to the unpredictable reality on the ground. Sobiski exemplified this, patiently waiting hours for the perfect moment to strike rather than charging at first sight, demonstrating a flexibility that delivered victory. Furthermore, the siege underscores a truth so fundamental it is often overlooked. Logistics are not a background detail. They are the central nervous system of any major undertaking. The Ottoman Empire's ability to sustain over 100,000 men and countless animals hundreds of miles from home for 2 months was a breathtaking achievement. Conversely, the Viennese defenders' meticulous, if desperate, management of their dwindling food supplies was what allowed them to hold on long enough for that help to arrive. In our world, this translates directly to supply chain management, cash flow, and resource allocation. A brilliant idea or a talented team is useless without the fuel to sustain it. A modern project manager ensuring their team has the right tools, budget, and bandwidth is executing the same essential function as the Ottoman officials coordinating supply caravans from Constantinople. Both understand that success is impossible without a functioning support system. Finally, the victory at Vienna stands as a monumental testament to the power of coalition building. The Holy League was an alliance of convenience, fraught with historical mistrust and competing interests between the Austrians, Poles, and Germans. Yet, they managed to sublimate their differences for a common goal. King John III Sobiski's first act as supreme commander, integrating the various national contingents so that no single group would bear the brunt of the fighting, was a stroke of diplomatic and strategic genius. This lesson is invaluable in today's globalized and interconnected environment. Whether in politics, where international cooperation is needed to tackle climate change or pandemics, or in business, where strategic partnerships can open new markets and combine strengths, the ability to build and maintain effective alliances is a decisive advantage. The siege teaches us that overcoming overwhelming odds is rarely a solo endeavor. It requires the collective strength of a united front, where shared purpose outweighs individual ambition. It challenges us to look beyond our immediate circle, to find common ground with unlikely partners, and to recognize that our greatest challenges are often too large to face alone. Long after the last cannonball had been fired and the final cavalryman had sheathed his sword, the Siege of Vienna began its second life, a powerful and enduring existence in the realm of culture, art, and collective memory. The raw events of 1683 were quickly woven into the fabric of European identity, transformed by artists, writers, and politicians into potent symbols that would resonate for centuries. This process of cultural remembrance tells us less about the historical facts of the siege and more about the needs, fears, and aspirations of the societies that chose to remember it. The battle was no longer just a military engagement. It became a story, a myth, and a lesson, its meaning constantly reshaped by the hands of time. The most immediate and visceral cultural responses were captured on canvas. European painters, particularly from Poland and the German states, rushed to immortalize the victory in a genre known as history painting. These works were not meant to be photorealistic accounts, but rather grand, dramatic propaganda pieces designed to inspire patriotism and religious fervor. The most iconic motif to emerge was the heroic cavalry charge led by King John III Sobiski. Artists like Julius Cossack and later Jan Machko depicted the winged hussars not merely as soldiers, but as almost divine avengers. They are shown descending from the Kollenberg Hills in a blaze of light, their iconic wings creating terrifying silhouettes against the sky, sweeping down upon a chaotic and disorganized Ottoman force. The composition of these paintings always directs the viewer's eye toward Sobiski himself, portrayed as a calm, commanding figure of destiny amidst the chaos, the undisputed savior of the scene. These images were reproduced in engravings and prints, circulating widely and solidifying a very specific, triumphant narrative of Christian Europe, heroically repelling the Eastern invader. The Ottoman artistic response, found in the delicate and detailed medium of the miniature painting, offers a fascinating and starkly different perspective. These works, often created for imperial albums, tend to de-emphasize the final defeat and instead focus on the scale and majesty of the Ottoman war machine during the campaign. They might depict the orderly layout of the siege lines, the impressive size of the artillery, or the grandeur of Grand Vizier Kara Mustafa Pasha's command tent. The goal here was not to document a loss but to affirm the power and reach of the Sultan, even in a campaign that ultimately failed. This divergence in artistic representation highlights a crucial truth: there is no single cultural memory of a major historical event. Instead, there are competing memories, each crafted to serve a different national story and to heal different psychological wounds. The European art celebrated deliverance, while the Ottoman art preserved dignity. Beyond the visual arts, the siege permeated literature and folklore. Epic poems were composed lauding Sobiski's valor, and the event quickly entered the realm of legend. In Austria and Poland, folktales emerged that spoke of the resilience of the Viennese people, often personified by figures like the baker's wife who bravely defended a breach. One of the most enduring and fragrant legends is that of the Viennese baker who, hearing the Ottomans tunneling underground, alerted the defenders and was thus credited with saving the city. As a reward, he was granted the privilege of creating a pastry in the shape of the Ottoman crescent moon, the kipfel, or kwasa, which one could symbolically devour in triumph. While the historical accuracy of this tale is dubious, its power is undeniable. It represents a cultural act of consuming one's conquered enemy, a sweet and satisfying coda to a bitter struggle. This potent symbolism made the siege an irresistible tool for political rhetoric, often with dangerous consequences. In the 19th and 20th centuries, the event was frequently ripped from its complex historical context and reduced to a simplistic allegory of a clash of civilizations. Political leaders seeking to rally nationalist sentiment or stoke anti-Islamic fears would invoke the Turkish menace at the gates of Vienna as a warning of a perpetual Eastern threat to Western values. This distorted memory was weaponized to justify xenophobia and exclusionary policies, a clear misuse of history that ignored the intricate realities of the 17th century conflict, which was more about imperial rivalry than pure religious hatred. The siege's memory became a convenient shorthand, a cultural trump card to be played during times of social anxiety, demonstrating how the past can be ruthlessly edited to serve the prejudices of the present. The cultural legacy extended even into music and theater. Composers like Johann Heinrich Schmelzer wrote celebratory works like the Marcha para la Victoria de Vienna, and the event has been featured in operas and plays up to the modern day. Each retelling, whether in a novel, a film, or a symphony, adds another layer to the myth, further distancing the cultural memory from the historical reality. This ongoing process of reinterpretation is not a corruption of history, but rather a testament to the event's profound impact. The Siege of Vienna ceased to be a mere date in a textbook and became a timeless story about resilience against overwhelming odds, the importance of unity, and the enduring tension between East and West. It is a story that continues to be told because we continue to find new meanings within it, proving that the true end of a historical event is not when it stops happening, but when we stop remembering it. One of the most pervasive and enduring myths surrounding the siege is the notion that this was a clear-cut religious war, a simple clash between Islam and Christianity. This narrative, often repeated in popular culture, dramatically oversimplifies the complex political realities of the 17th century. While religious differences were a powerful motivator and a tool for mobilization on both sides, the conflict was fundamentally one of imperial ambition and geopolitical strategy. The Ottoman Empire was not a monolithic Islamic bloc. Its army was a remarkably diverse force that included Christian units from the Balkans, such as Moldavians and Wallachans, who fought alongside the Sultan's troops for their own political or economic reasons. Similarly, the Holy League was a fragile alliance of convenience, not a unified body of devout believers. The Catholic Polish king John III Sobiski had previously been an ally of the Muslim Ottoman Empire against his Orthodox Christian rivals in Russia. The cooperation between the Polish, Austrian, and various German states was fraught with deep-seated mistrust and competing secular interests. Reducing this multifaceted conflict to a religious crusade obscures the intricate dance of power politics that truly drove the events of 1683. Another area where popular imagination often runs wild is in the numbers involved. Exaggerated accounts, sometimes claiming the Ottoman force numbered over 300,000 men, have been passed down through romanticized histories. Modern scholarship, cross-referencing Ottoman payroll records, supply requisitions, and European observers' more reliable estimates, suggests a more realistic, though still staggering, figure. The Ottoman army likely consisted of between 150,000 and 200,000 men, including combatants and the massive support staff needed for such an operation. The relief force under King Sobiski was significantly smaller, probably numbering around 70,000 troops. Likewise, the image of the winged hussars charge involving 20,000 cavalry is a dramatic exaggeration. The actual number was likely closer to 3,000. These inflated figures, often born from the desire to magnify the glory of the victory, actually diminish the real achievement. The true story is not one of an impossibly vast horde defeated by a miracle, but of a highly organized and formidable army being outmaneuvered and outfought by a well-coordinated coalition, a testament to strategy and leadership rather than overwhelming numerical superiority. Perhaps no myth is more deliciously entrenched than the legend of the Viennese baker and the first croissant. The charming tale tells of a baker who, working through the night, hears the sound of Ottoman sappers digging a tunnel under the city. He raises the alarm, the miners are thwarted, and the city is saved. As a reward, he invents a pastry in the shape of the Ottoman crescent moon, the kipfel or croissant, so that the citizens of Vienna can symbolically devour their enemies. While this is a wonderful story, the historical evidence simply doesn't support it. Similar pastries existed in various forms across Europe for centuries before the siege. The more plausible origin of coffee in Vienna, however, does have a strong connection to the event. Following the Ottoman retreat, among the vast quantities of abandoned supplies were sacks of strange, dark beans that the victorious troops initially mistook for camel fodder. A Polish officer named Jerzy Franciszek Kulczycki, who had spent time in the Ottoman Empire and recognized the beans as coffee, reportedly claimed them as his share of the spoils. He then went on to open one of Vienna's first coffee houses, adapting the bitter Turkish coffee to local tastes by sweetening it with honey and milk, creating a precursor to the modern Viennese coffee culture. While Kulczycki's specific story is also debated by historians, it is far more credible than the baker's tale and illustrates a genuine cultural transfer born from the conflict. These myths persist because they serve a purpose. They simplify a complex historical event into an easily digestible story of good versus evil, of heroic underdogs and clear-cut victories. They provide a satisfying narrative arc and create powerful, lasting symbols of national identity. However, this comes at a great cost to our understanding. By accepting the myth of a purely religious war, we ignore the complex political machinations that are far more relevant to understanding modern international relations. By exaggerating the numbers, we move the event into the realm of fantasy, making its lessons seem inapplicable to our own world. And by favoring a charming fable about a baker, we risk overlooking the real, tangible examples of cultural exchange, like the introduction of coffee, that demonstrate how even the bitterest conflicts can lead to unexpected and lasting connections. Moving beyond these myths is not about stripping the past of its drama, but about appreciating the true, complicated, and far more fascinating reality where strategy, logistics, and human ingenuity truly decided the day. While the siege was a brutal confrontation, it also acted as a massive, high-stakes laboratory that accelerated the pace of military innovation at a breathtaking speed. The unprecedented challenges faced by both attackers and defenders forced engineers, smiths, and strategists to think creatively, leading to breakthroughs that would redefine warfare for the next century and beyond. The very walls of Vienna and the trenches dug to undermine them became testing grounds for new ideas, with the immediate feedback being a matter of life and death, a powerful motivator for rapid improvement and adaptation. In the realm of artillery, the siege delivered a clear and unambiguous lesson. Mobility and rate of fire were just as critical as sheer destructive power. The immense difficulty the Ottomans faced in transporting their massive bombards from Constantinople highlighted a major logistical weakness. In the years following the siege, European powers, particularly the French and the Austrians, invested heavily in standardizing and lightening their field guns. The goal was to create cannons that were powerful enough to batter fortifications but could be moved quickly with smaller teams of horses and deployed with greater flexibility on the battlefield. This led to innovations in gun carriage design, using lighter but stronger woods and iron reinforcements. Perhaps more importantly, the science of ballistics took a great leap forward. Gunners had to become mathematicians, carefully calculating trajectories with new precision. This spurred the development of more accurate sighting mechanisms and standardized, pre-measured powder charges, which significantly increased the speed and accuracy of reloading. turning artillery from a slow, siege-breaking tool into a more dynamic force on the open field. The defensive lessons learned at Vienna were etched directly into the stone and earth of the city itself. The trace Italian style had proven its worth, but the siege exposed areas for refinement. Military engineers across Europe pored over maps and accounts of the damage, leading to the next evolution in fortress design, the polygonal system. This new approach moved away from the prominent arrowhead bastions, which had proven to be vulnerable targets for concentrated artillery fire. Instead, fortifications became lower, broader, and more angular, with deeply recessed bastions and extensive outworks like ravelins and hornworks that created layered killing zones. The idea was to force an attacker to conquer a series of independent defensive positions, each one covering its neighbor with fire before they could even reach the main wall. The vast, open glacis slopes leading up to the walls were also carefully engineered to be fully exposed to defensive fire, leaving no cover for approaching troops. These sophisticated designs, inspired by the hard-won experience at Vienna, would dominate European military architecture for the next 200 years. Beyond the obvious tools of war, the siege acted as a catalyst for advancements in more subtle but equally vital support systems. The critical importance of timely intelligence, so starkly demonstrated by the race of the relief army, led to a professionalization of military cartography. Armies began to employ dedicated teams of surveyors to create detailed, standardized maps of strategic regions, complete with accurate topographical features, road conditions, and potential supply points. The need for rapid communication between scattered units and distant capitals spurred investment in more reliable courier networks and even early experiments with optical telegraph systems using flags or lights to send coded messages over long distances. Furthermore, the monumental task of supplying such vast armies highlighted glaring deficiencies in logistics. This led to the creation of more permanent military administrative corps responsible for pre-positioning supplies, managing depots, and improving road networks to facilitate the rapid movement of troops and their support trains, laying the groundwork for the modern military's complex logistical tale. Remarkably, the technological ripple effects of the siege were not confined to the battlefield. The engineering prowess honed in building siege works and fortifications found peaceful applications in civilian life. The same skills used to construct stable artillery platforms and reinforce crumbling walls were directly applied to civil engineering projects. This expertise accelerated the construction of more durable bridges, stronger river embankments to control flooding, and improved road-building techniques that could support heavier traffic and withstand harsh weather. The increased demand for high-quality iron for cannon founding drove innovations in metallurgy and mining. More efficient blast furnaces were developed to meet the military's insatiable appetite for metal, and these improved methods later benefited industries like shipbuilding, toolmaking, and construction. Even the organizational models developed for managing thousands of laborers on siege works were adapted for large-scale public works projects, bringing a new level of efficiency and coordination to the building of canals, ports, and other infrastructure that would fuel the economic growth of the following century. The desperate ingenuity born outside the walls of Vienna ultimately helped build a more connected and resilient Europe. Yet for every celebrated name like Kara Mustafa or Sobiski, there were dozens of others whose contributions were just as vital, their stories fading into the background of history's grand narrative. These were the specialists, the technicians, and the steadfast commanders operating without the glory, the true unsung architects whose collective effort made the siege possible. One such figure was Mustafa Agha, the chief Ottoman engineer entrusted with the Herculean task of directing the vast mining operations against Vienna's walls. Unlike the European renegades who often garnered attention and suspicion, Mustafa Agha was a product of the empire's own rigorous system, a master of geometry and soil mechanics who likely trained in the imperial schools of Constantinople. His days were spent in a world of calculations and constant peril, moving between the forward sap trenches to assess progress and the drafting tables in the rear to update intricate diagrams of the tunnel networks. While the Grand Vizier issued grand commands, it was Mustafa Agha and his team who solved the practical problems, determining the angle of a trench to avoid enfilading fire, calculating the precise amount of gunpowder needed to collapse a bastion without destroying the tunnel itself, and listening for the faint, chilling sounds of Austrian counterminers drawing near. His expertise was the razor's edge on which the entire Ottoman strategy balanced, yet his name appears only in obscure payroll records and a handful of Ottoman chronicles, a ghost in the machinery of war. On the other side of the walls, the defense of Vienna did not rest on spirit alone. It was orchestrated with iron resolve by a commander whose cool head proved to be the city's greatest asset, Ernst Rudiger von Starhemberg. While King John III Sobiski would claim the triumphant title of savior, it was Starhemberg who made that salvation possible by buying the crucial time. A seasoned veteran of the Franco-Dutch Wars, he was a man better with actions than words, known for his piercing gaze and a severity that brooked no dissent. When the Ottoman noose tightened, he imposed a draconian discipline that was, in hindsight, the key to survival. He ordered the execution of deserters and ruthlessly suppressed any talk of surrender, understanding that morale was a fortress that had to be defended as fiercely as the stone walls. His genius lay in his meticulous organization, turning a desperate populace into a highly functional defense force. He delegated authority with precision, assigning guilds to specific sections of the wall, organizing round-the-clock firefighting brigades, and ensuring that every able-bodied person, from nobleman to scullery maid, had a role to play. His leadership was not warm or inspiring in a conventional sense, but it was exactly what the crisis demanded: unyielding, pragmatic, and utterly indispensable. Without his stubborn, administrative brilliance in those desperate weeks, Vienna would have collapsed from within long before the Polish cavalry ever appeared on the horizon. Beyond the engineers and generals, the siege relied on a cast of characters who operated in the shadows, their skills bridging the vast divides of language and culture. Interpreters were among the most valuable and vulnerable participants, fluent in German, Hungarian, Turkish, and perhaps Italian or Polish. These linguistic experts were the conduits for all negotiation, intelligence, and communication between the two hostile camps. They were the voices during the parleys for prisoner exchanges, the ears listening to the boasts of captured soldiers for any scrap of useful information, and the translators of the countless messages that flew between the various Allied commanders. Their work required not just fluency, but a deep cultural intuition to accurately convey tone, nuance, and threat. A mistranslated word could mean the death of a prisoner or the failure of a critical negotiation. Many of these interpreters were likely Armenians, Jews, or Greeks, members of communities that traditionally facilitated trade and diplomacy between empires, and their allegiance was often pragmatic rather than patriotic, making them viewed with suspicion by both sides. Their crucial role is almost entirely absent from the heroic paintings and epic poems, yet the entire flow of information, the very nervous system of the conflict, depended on their unseen and unthanked work. Equally overlooked were the medics and surgeons who waged their own war against agony and infection in the stifling air of cellars and tents. On the Ottoman side, medical knowledge was advanced, incorporating practices from across the Islamic world and beyond. Their surgeons were highly experienced with traumatic injuries, adept at amputations and the treatment of gunshot wounds, using opium for pain and vinegar for cleaning. Within Vienna, the situation was far more dire. Physicians like Paul de Sorbate, the city's leading doctor, fought a losing battle against typhus and dysentery in overcrowded, filthy shelters, with supplies of medicine and clean bandages running critically low. These men and women were not just healers but also innovators in triage, making impossible decisions about who could be saved with the limited resources available. They worked until they dropped from exhaustion, their hands stained with blood and soil, their contributions measured not in ground gained but in lives prolonged for one more day, one more hour, enough time for the relief army to arrive. Theirs is a history written in suffering and quiet courage, with no monuments erected in their honor. The reason these figures remain in the historical shadows is a complex tapestry of bias, narrative convenience, and the passage of time. National history has a tendency to simplify stories into singular, heroic narratives: the glorious king, the brilliant general. Figures like Mustafa Pasha, being Ottoman, did not fit the triumphant Christian narrative that dominated European historiography for centuries. Similarly, the vital role of interpreters and medics lacks the dramatic appeal of a cavalry charge. Their work is procedural and undramatic, though no less important. Furthermore, history is often written by and for the elite, focusing on those with titles and high rank, while the skilled craftsman, the low-born translator, or the overworked doctor are deemed less noteworthy. Rediscovering these stories requires sifting through paymaster ledgers, personal letters, and obscure court documents rather than the grand official chronicles. Bringing them to the forefront does not diminish the achievements of the famous leaders. Instead, it enriches our understanding, revealing that history is never the work of a single individual but a vast, collaborative, and profoundly human endeavor. The siege was not won by a king alone, but by the collective will of miners, translators, surgeons, and stubborn commanders, a reminder that behind every great event stand countless forgotten architects. To truly grasp the significance of Vienna 1683, we must pull the camera back and view it not as an isolated event, but as a single, dramatic frame in the long, brutal film of siege warfare throughout history. When we place it alongside other legendary sieges, fascinating patterns of similarity and stark contrasts in strategy, technology, and human consequence begin to emerge. Consider, for instance, the iconic fall of Constantinople in 1453, an event that in many ways bookends the story of Vienna. Both were clashes between an expanding Ottoman Empire and a bastion of European culture. Both featured massive armies and the largest cannons of their age, and both were seen by their participants as existential, almost spiritual contests. Yet, the outcomes could not have been more different, and the reasons why reveal the evolution of warfare over the intervening 2 centuries. The most critical difference lies in the technology of defense. Constantinople's mighty Theodosian walls, which had stood for 1,000 years, were ultimately defeated by the new power of Ottoman supercannons, like the massive basilica, which could hurl a 700-pound stone ball. This was a victory of emerging gunpowder technology over aging medieval fortification. Vienna, however, presented a completely different challenge. Its defenders were protected by the Trace Italian, the latest in Renaissance military architecture. These low-angled, earth-backed bastions were specifically designed to absorb and withstand cannon fire, rendering the Ottoman bombardment far less effective than it had been at Constantinople. This technological shift forced a change in tactics. Where the earlier siege was decided largely by bombardment, Vienna required a far more complex and time-consuming approach of sapping, mining, and close-quarters combat. The comparison shows us that by the late 17th century, the advantage in siege warfare had, at least temporarily, swung back to the defender, making a quick victory through sheer bombardment nearly impossible. If we journey even further back to the Siege of Jerusalem during the First Crusade in 1099, we enter a different world entirely, one dominated by sheer religious fervor and almost primitive mechanics compared to the scientific warfare outside Vienna. The Crusaders outside Jerusalem lacked any significant artillery. Their tools were wooden siege towers, battering rams, and their own overwhelming religious zeal. The defense, too, was fueled by a desperate faith. While the motivations at Vienna were also deeply religious for many participants, the actual conduct of the siege was a far more secular, technical affair. It was directed by engineers calculating powder loads and sappers listening for countermines, not by priests leading processions around the walls. This contrast highlights a gradual, though incomplete, professionalization of warfare, where technical expertise began to rival raw fervor as the key to victory. The emotional drive was still there, but it was now channeled through the cold, precise machinery of military science. Despite these vast differences in era and technology, certain universal themes of siege warfare connect all of these events across the centuries. The absolute paramount importance of logistics is a constant that echoes from ancient times to the modern day. The Ottoman army at Vienna, just like the Roman legions besieging Masada or the Crusaders at Jerusalem, faced the unending challenge of feeding tens of thousands of men and animals in a barren, hostile environment. An army could be victorious in every engagement, but if its supply lines failed, it would simply wither away. This logistical burden often dictated strategy more than tactics did. It created a cruel clock ticking down for the attacker, forcing them to win quickly or risk starvation and disease. Another timeless theme is the profound role of leadership under unimaginable pressure. The fate of a city, an empire, or a faith often rested on the decisions of a single individual. We can draw a direct line between the resolute determination of Emperor Constantine XI, who chose to die on the walls of Constantinople, the calculated piety of Crusader leaders like Godfrey of Bouillon, and the stubborn, administrative brilliance of Ernst Rudiger von Starhemberg holding Vienna together. Each faced the same ultimate test: could they maintain their own resolve and, more importantly, the morale of their people in the face of certain doom? Their ability to inspire, to organize, and to make ruthless decisions under the constant thunder of siege engines was a variable just as critical as the thickness of their walls or the number of their soldiers. Finally, viewing Vienna in this global context reveals its unique place as a genuine turning point. Many sieges simply conclude a chapter. The fall of Constantinople ended the Byzantine Empire. The capture of Jerusalem opened a short-lived Crusader kingdom. But Vienna was different. Its successful defense did not just preserve a city, it actively reversed the tide of history. It halted the Ottoman Empire's last major offensive into the heart of Europe and catalyzed a Christian counter-offensive that would eventually push the frontier hundreds of miles southeast. Unlike the other sieges, which were often the climax of a story, Vienna was a dramatic beginning, the opening shot in a century of war that would redefine the map of Eastern Europe. This macro view helps us see that the tremors felt from the cavalry charge on the Kollenberg were not just a local event. They were seismic shocks that reverberated through global politics for generations, setting the stage for the slow decline of one empire and the dramatic rise of another. Beneath the grand strategies and the roar of cannons lies a far more unsettling reality, one that forces us to confront the profound moral questions woven into the very fabric of warfare. The Siege of Vienna, for all its tactical brilliance, was also a vast engine of human suffering, a months-long ordeal that tested the boundaries of what was considered acceptable in 17th century conflict. The concept of a just war was not a modern invention. It was a subject of intense debate among theologians, philosophers, and military leaders of the era. Figures like the Dutch jurist Hugo Grotius had already begun to lay the groundwork for international law, arguing in works like On the Law of War and Peace that even in war certain moral constraints must apply. These principles, however, were often stretched to their breaking point under the brutal pragmatism of a siege. The most acute suffering was undoubtedly borne by the non-combatants trapped within Vienna's walls. The deliberate targeting of a city's civilian population through bombardment and starvation was a recognized, though horrifying, tactic of siege warfare. The Ottoman mortars firing incendiary shells over the walls were not aiming for military installations alone. Their goal was to terrorize the population, destroy homes, and cripple the city's spirit. This raised a grim ethical dilemma. Was it permissible to inflict suffering on thousands of innocent people to break the will of a few hundred defenders? Contemporary writings from within the city, like the diaries of citizens describing the deaths of children from starvation or falling debris, stand as stark testimony to the human cost of this calculated strategy. For the defenders, the ethical calculus was just as dire. Commander Starhemberg's order to execute deserters and his ruthless confiscation of private food supplies were brutal acts, but he justified them as necessary for the collective survival of the entire city. This tension between individual rights and the greater good became a matter of life and death played out on a daily basis. The treatment of prisoners offered another murky ethical landscape. While there were established, if informal, codes for the ransom of high-ranking officers, the fate of common soldiers and civilians was far less certain. The aftermath of the failed Ottoman assault on September the 8th provides a chilling example. After repelling the attack, the enraged defenders are reported to have killed hundreds of captured Ottoman soldiers in retaliation. On the other side, the fate of any Viennese citizen caught outside the walls would have been equally grim, likely ending in slavery or execution. These actions, while commonplace for the time, were already being questioned by forward-thinking minds. Religious leaders on both sides grappled with these contradictions, often using faith to justify the unjustifiable. Ottoman imams framed the campaign as a holy war or Gaza, which carried its own set of permissions and imperatives. Christian priests within Vienna preached that their struggle was a righteous defense against the infidel, a narrative that helped steel the resolve of the defenders but also dehumanized the enemy, making the brutality of the conflict easier to stomach. This dehumanization is perhaps the most persistent and dangerous ethical pitfall of any conflict. Reducing the enemy to a faceless other makes it easier to employ psychological tactics designed to break not just walls but minds. The Ottomans' use of noise, the constant day and night drumming and cannonade, was a deliberate form of psychological torture. The rumors they spread, perhaps through arrows shot into the city with messages claiming the fall of other European strongholds, were early exercises in misinformation warfare aimed at crushing hope. These tactics targeted the very humanity of the defenders, seeking to erode their reason and their will to resist. Yet, even amidst this calculated cruelty, flashes of a shared humanity would occasionally break through. There are scattered accounts of brief, informal truces to collect the wounded, or moments of respect between opposing engineers who recognized a worthy adversary in the intricate dance of mine and countermine. These moments were exceptions, but they reveal the universal human desire for connection, even in the heart of hell. The events at Vienna challenge us to look beyond the maps and the maneuvers to see the profound human cost of strategic genius. The brilliant engineering of the sap trenches meant more soldiers died in muddy ditches from disease and snipers. The masterful logistics of supplying the Ottoman army required the conscription of thousands of peasants and the stripping of the surrounding countryside, causing widespread suffering far from the battlefield. Every tactical decision, however brilliant, had a human consequence. This is not a truth confined to the 17th century. It resonates deeply in our modern world, where warfare can be waged by drones and satellites, creating an even greater emotional distance between the planner and the planned upon. The siege reminds us that behind every strategy there are people who are hungry, terrified, and hoping to see another day. It asks us to remember that the ultimate cost of war is not measured in territory gained or lost, but in the silent, often forgotten stories of those who endured it, a sobering thought that connects us across the centuries to the very real people who lived through those tumultuous events. For those who wish to move beyond the pages of history books, the city of Vienna itself becomes a living museum, its very streets and stones whispering secrets of the Great Siege. The most dramatic physical evidence lies not in a display case, but woven directly into the urban fabric. While the massive bastions that once defined the city's skyline were largely dismantled in the 19th century to make way for the elegant Ringstrasse Boulevard, their ghostly outline remains. You can still trace the path of the old fortifications by following the gentle curve of streets and the layout of parks that now occupy the former defensive glacis. The most tangible survivor is the magnificent Burgtor or Imperial Gate, which once served as a central portal through the walls. Standing before it today, one can almost hear the echoes of the final, desperate assault that nearly breached this very point, a silent sentinel that witnessed the chaos and courage of 1683. For a more intimate connection, one must descend beneath the modern city. A network of cellars and tunnels, some dating back centuries, still exists below the historic center. While not all are open to the public, archaeological surveys have confirmed that many of these subterranean spaces were critical during the siege, providing shelter from the bombardment and serving as listening posts for the counterminers desperately trying to detect Ottoman sappers. In these cool, dark, and silent spaces, history feels immediate and palpable. The chill in the air and the rough texture of the stone walls are the same sensations experienced by those Viennese citizens huddled in fear and hope, making the past feel less like a story and more like a physical presence you can reach out and touch. The artifacts recovered from this period offer a more personal, poignant window into the event. The Historisches Museum, Vienna's Museum of Military History, holds an unparalleled collection. Here, you can stand face to face with the actual tents of Grand Vizier Kara Mustafa Pasha, their rich fabrics and intricate designs speaking to the opulence and confidence he brought to the campaign. Perhaps more moving are the simpler objects: a battered cooking pot from the Ottoman camp, a musket ball flattened against a Viennese wall, a personal prayer book carried by a soldier. Each item tells a silent story of the individual who owned it, transforming grand historical narratives into intimate human experiences. Recent archaeological work, often conducted during modern construction projects, continues to add to this story. Excavations around the areas that were once the Ottoman siege lines have unearthed uniform buttons, coinage, and fragments of pottery, slowly helping historians map the exact layout of the massive camp with greater precision than ever before. Preserving this history, however, is a constant and delicate challenge. Urban development is the greatest threat, constantly covering over and building upon the very ground where history happened. Archaeologists often have only a narrow window of opportunity to investigate a site before the foundations of a new building are poured, forcing them to work quickly and methodically under immense pressure. Furthermore, the materials themselves are fragile. The iron of a cannonball corrodes, the leather of a boot decays, and the earthworks of a long-filled siege trench are easily erased by a bulldozer's blade. This makes every discovery a race against time, a fleeting chance to extract a clue from the soil before it is lost forever. What these physical remnants tell us goes far beyond confirming the stories in history books. They provide crucial ground truth details that written accounts often overlook. The distribution of spent musket balls and cannon shot helps historians reconstruct the exact lines of fire and the intensity of the bombardment in specific sectors. Analysis of Ottoman horse bones found in campsites can reveal the animal's diet and health, offering insights into the state of the besieging army's logistics as the campaign dragged on. Even the study of latrine pits, while not glamorous, provides invaluable data on the diet and diseases that afflicted the soldiers, painting a more complete picture of their daily suffering. This tangible evidence allows us to move beyond the strategies of generals and understand the reality of the common soldier and citizen, their struggles etched into the very objects they left behind. This ongoing dialogue between the shovels of archaeologists and the documents of historians ensures that the story of the siege is never finished, but is constantly being refined and deepened with every new fragment of the past that comes to light. If the story of the siege has ignited a desire to walk in the footsteps of the defenders and attackers, you are in for a treat because Vienna offers an incredibly immersive historical experience. The best place to begin your journey is at the Historisches Museum, the Museum of Military History. Housed in a magnificent arsenal built in the aftermath of the siege, the museum itself is a monument to the event it commemorates. Here you can stand in awe before the centerpiece of their collection, the actual tent of Grand Vizier Kara Mustafa Pasha. Seeing its rich fabrics, intricate designs, and imposing size up close is a profoundly moving experience, making the distant commander feel startlingly real. The museum also holds an unparalleled array of artifacts, from the armor of the winged hussars and the massive Ottoman siege cannons to more intimate items like personal letters and medical instruments, each one telling a silent story of the individuals caught in the conflict. For a more tangible sense of the siege geography, take a walk through the city itself. While the massive bastion walls were largely dismantled in the 19th century, you can still trace their outline by following the Grand Ringstrasse Boulevard, which was built on the open ground that once surrounded the city. To truly feel the history beneath your feet, descend into the depths of the city's ancient cellars. While not all are open to the public, specialized tours occasionally offer access to these subterranean spaces. In these cool, dark passages, you can almost hear the faint echoes of the counterminers listening for Ottoman picks, a chilling connection to the desperate underground war that decided the city's fate. Then, for the ultimate panoramic view, take a short trip to the top of the Kollenberg Hill. Gazing down at the city spread out below, you can envision the vast Ottoman encampment and imagine the thunderous moment when the Polish cavalry began their legendary descent, a perspective that truly brings the entire strategic picture into stunning focus. For those who prefer to explore from home, a wealth of exceptional resources is available at your fingertips. An outstanding place to start is with John Stoy's masterful book, The Siege of Vienna, widely regarded by historians as the most authoritative and readable single-volume account in English. It provides a balanced, deeply researched narrative that does justice to both sides of the conflict. If you are captivated by the personal drama, Andrew Wheatcroft's The Enemy at the Gate offers a gripping, character-driven look at the clash of empires. For a visual immersion, seek out the documentary The Battle of Vienna from the History Channel's Decisive Battles series, which uses detailed animation to break down the tactics of the final clash. And for the truly adventurous, many European national libraries and archives, such as the Austrian National Library, have digitized collections where you can view original maps, soldiers' diaries, and official decrees from the period, offering an unfiltered window into the past. For a truly hands-on approach, consider engaging with the vibrant community of historical reenactors who keep this history alive with astonishing accuracy. Across Europe and North America, groups dedicated to the Polish Winged Hussars, the Imperial Austrian Army, and the Ottoman Janissaries meticulously research and recreate the uniforms, weapons, and drills of the period. Attending one of their public events or living history displays allows you to see the brilliant colors of the banners, hear the deafening report of period-accurate muskets, and speak with passionate experts who have dedicated themselves to understanding every stitch of clothing and every nuance of combat. It is one thing to read about the charge of the Hussars. It is entirely another to stand just feet away as they thunder past, a sensory experience that bridges the gap between the past and the present in a way no book or film ever could. This active engagement, whether through travel, reading, or participation, transforms history from a passive subject into a living, breathing story in which we can all find a connection. And so, as the dust settled outside the battered walls of Vienna, what remained was not just a story of a battle won or lost, but a profound testament to the invisible architecture of human endeavor. We set out to uncover the unseen masterminds behind this monumental event, and in doing so, we discovered a world where victory was forged not by chance, but through the meticulous interplay of mechanics, maps, and masterful minds. From the engineers whose trenches snaked like fate towards the city walls, to the cartographers who translated landscape into strategy, and the leaders whose ambitions and errors alike shaped the course of empires, these were the true architects of history, the brilliant planners operating in the shadows of the clashing armies. The lasting impact of their work echoes across the centuries, reminding us that the grand narratives of our past are built upon a foundation of countless detailed decisions, of ingenuity applied to the most daunting challenges. This siege was a hinge upon which the door of European history swung, halting one empire's expansion and empowering another's ascendancy, all because of the plans laid and executed by those we so often overlook. It challenges us to look beyond the obvious heroes and to appreciate the complex collective effort that truly drives the world forward. A historian once reflected that, in war, the moral is to the physical as 3 is to 1. The Siege of Vienna embodies this truth completely. It was a contest of wills as much as weapons, of resilience as much as resilience, proving that the human spirit, when guided by planning and ingenuity, can overcome even the most overwhelming odds. This story is far more than a relic of the past. It is a powerful lens through which to understand our own world, where strategy, innovation, and collaboration remain the bedrock of any great undertaking. We are so curious to hear your thoughts. What aspect of the siege's hidden history did you find most fascinating? Was it the engineering, the intelligence gathering, or the personal stories of those involved? Share your reflections in the comments below. Let's continue this conversation. And if you enjoyed this deep dive into the unseen forces that shape our world, please subscribe to the channel for more journeys into the captivating complexities of medieval history. The past is not a simple story. It is a rich tapestry woven from countless threads, each one waiting to be uncovered.